Hey Dustin, did you say you had a different one?
Yeah.
Is it not black? Yeah, awesome, thank you.
You don't need Thank you.
2 minutes. Oh my God, this is
If you take it down, I leave that nigga hurt. Run up on my bro, and have that nigga murdered. God, like the J's, in case she was the worst. True it into dinner, in case she was the worst. Niggas wish the worst. But I'm bullshit off the pump.
Yeah, hey, like we had her as a
No, I know we are, but I can't bother.
No problem.
I can't get anybody else. Congratulations, brother.
Play devil's advocate.
Actually, it's in the drama, so I was just
Wow.
One's always got it worse. Oh no, there's I'll just give you this one. Thanks. Alright. I guess I gotta give like a thank you speech before I go. I'm not used to it. So I would like to essentially thank first off, I'd like to thank everybody in the debate community. I mean, most of us are terrible people. But I mean, at the end of the day, we all are obviously part of a community that while we all hate each other, we also all kind of like to work together at the same time. And I think that's something that's valuable. Obviously, other more specific people I need to know, lab leaders, #Max 2K16. Me and DJ went to that lab. Something happened to us over the summer where we improved a lot because we used to be very bad. And I think that's the result of not only our lab leaders, shout out to Callum, Jared, Mealy, Andres, etc. Right? But also the people who were in our lab with us. They were the opponents that gave us sort of the skills that are necessary to at least relatively succeed throughout the year. And I think that's something that's important. Next, I guess I should thank the coaches, obviously. Fabulous Rosie Valdez, John Block as well, Anthony Joseph, the God over there, all of the fine Baylor staff, Christiana, Kana, Greg McWard, everybody really came together to help us out. And I don't know really like how to say that in the thank you speech, but I do legitimately thank y'all. Final people, parents. They're very important in the general sense because you need parents, I guess. But in the debate context, they also pay for things, which is helpful. But generally, my parents are great and they've been really supportive. So I'd like to thank them.
Thanks for debating with me.
I mean,
Lee, I was like,
I
you want to need.
Yeah, I didn't know if I should be like hurt or like what. But I should say thank you to DJ because he's my partner, the best 2A on the planet, undoubtedly. But I hate him with a passion, and so I won't thank you. But this is my brother, and I wouldn't be here. So that's what we need. Oh, I mean, no, thank you. Shout out to you. But otherwise, is everybody ready for 1AC? All right. Modern disciplinary practice originated from the surveillance assumptions of the plantation, logistical codes of the slave right devices of plausible, even resistant efforts of the plantation were sublimated into civil society legible practices of resistance are ultimately subsumed by whiteness only by destabilizing the information regime to catalog and can we combat what Indian violence, Brown 15. This lecture must be understood as a valid regulation of black design interrogated with African legislation, land laws, ordinances for regulating slaves in the 1960 technologies of seeing that a racialized form of candle flame to the white gaze will approach identify who is in place as linking with gender, race, labor, disabilities, and other identifying markers. Biometric information, political technology, and the surveillance of black mobilities and containment as a measure of the black body and technology of slavery, plantation condition, the Jamaican branding, transatlantic slavery is a marking of blackness as commodity branding was a measure of slavery and actually making black electrical as property. The history of branding and transatlantic slavery anticipates a social sorting. I trace a genealogy of digital epidermalization by focusing on vertical whiteness and development of contemporary biometric technology, epidermal thinking, reason, R&D, the body digitized identification, surveillance, to reduce the flesh to pure information, R&D uses branding blackness and contemporary capitalism and unlocked by anxiety provides the material conditions to make domestic surveillance possible. Surveillance doctrines do not occur in isolation, but rather signify the effects of the spectral presence of the middle classes and passage and plantation, pre-visual regimes of simulation, prevention, structures, liberal, imaginary, normalizing the policing of black mobility, placing it into a category of risk only in analysis, beginning with child slavery, can account for the modern manifestations of sovereign death, making it its attempted imposition of legibility upon all bodies forever. Groups and individual labor is dangerous, black classes, citizens, your work, civil, dangerous, minority, take to use measured power, excludes other groups and negative behavior, normalized production, normal, remove environmental race, verifications, officers, beliefs, and narcissism has been transcended by pre-visualization with simulation, profiling, probation, the observation, social sorting, population categories, response, qualifying forces, surveillance, documentation, architectural design, slave workers, slavery, during the past were subject to finding bill about the violent regulation, blackness, the spectacle, violent measurements, branding, action, for existence, direct plantation, inventory, cataloging, slavery, branding as means of accounting for cargo, not only individualized, but a massifying practice constituted in the category of subject blackness, commodity, plantation was regulating likeness, so that acts making black blood, all trade and soul. But 1AC is a private, poetic, historical repetition with creative queer, temporality, communicative spaces, destabilization, and linear powerful narratives, re-articulation of black life resilient in the face of unending violence. In other words, take the chance to find birth and all this death. Gums 10. We must find a way to read historical repetition, flow edically, so we can transform relationship patterns, stratify bodies, and body connection, link lives together. These texts and bodies, workers, and end generation movement of our bodies. Our sites for members must take seriously this memory, capitalism, rights on this circulation, start receiving, making healing works, multiple duration, bringing generation, how the articulated theory of life and death, of our responses to radical expression, divided feminism, must be meaningful in action, not a possibility, home despite the violence predicated on the meaninglessness of black life, which they will feel the love and meaning of black life, despite the violent races, mother does not depend on biological production, unification, Jordan face more death with fully criminal harm, labor, mother next. Jordan the Lord across death, they made their own labor of mother themselves, with their survival depends on the theoretical practice, radical mother, there is birth, and all this death, the discourse they saw, the meanings of to survive, and the recreation of the body's data undergoes domestic surveillance is a converse subject into a series of signifiers and codes, and then places them with an epidermal scheme of whiteness, the white body's gaze upon the black subject fundamentally requires a prototypical subject of enunciation, then we project upon the global population, hyper perfective, also determine the measured use of average value. This produces an unending anxiety with the liberal subject attempting to sustain order at all costs, making racialized violence inevitable. This prefiguring of the body's data manifests in racial data that depicts the black body's particular points of stasis within the representation of grid. As such, our response to the topics of diversity, surveillance, attack, the grid of oneself out of sight of praxis of unintelligibility taken forward from non-visible modes of being, such as the magic of refusal and anti-surveillance. The 1AC presents an experiential encounter with both power and the form of surveillance that sets the basis for particular confrontation with the surveillance state Brown. The direction of the space for black subject within the racial group of representation, possibility consent for like the abnormalization of space to for ways with abnormalization, even the mere presence of black space goes criminal within the racially saturated with physical sexual these violence is not racist violence, rather than with whites must be protected this engagement in most life enhance the ability to labor the access to labor and arch surveillance and tactics before the real oneself out of sight and play from freedom slave and this life for like 2 freedom flavor, magic plates, mobilizing, critique, racialized surveillance, sexual, and anti-surveillance, counter-surveillance, and other practices, dark surveillance, lost imaginators that are hopeful for another way of being inside of particularly with anti-black surveillance for the tools of surveillance and line of law where challenge in order to facilitate problems came not strictly enacted by those who fall under the category of black and dark surveillance, responsibilities, coordinates, most responding to, challenging, and confronting a surveillance that was all-encompassing surveillance acts and were employed by people whose way to escape resistance, like this way, knowing dark surveillance, which not only to observe those in authority, but also the use of those experiential inside of surveillance in order to resist the pressure for examining surveillance and life for question how technology installed during slavery, monitoring, track, black, private, academic, race, surveillance, body might be contended with. Our sociogenic account for racialization is necessary to carry us the way in which blacks is found in a particular position and environment on the greater signification. The affirmative is an affirmation of dark matter, the application of blackness in our decisions, the surveillance across multiple spaces, and points of time to trace the instantiation of black resistance, domination, Brown 15. The fact of blackness is a signal of surveillance, and remember, like I say, this sociology and what isn't is not bound within the category of human fixed black blackness, not produce surveillance of normalization, imposition, race, bomb, body, further on. There is no unlockable resistance space shape formed by language, dark matter, sex, of blackness, and masculine understanding this event, so working across multiple space, the input, slavery, bigger take is time to think about the multiplicities of blackness with cultural correction, from performance, privileges, guns, cultural identities, is not black experiences, static, or singular, instead of serious transformation, might use the term blackness, signal blackness as a sign. One that here's particularly history of resistance and domination is always under contestation, blackness, identity, culture, history, present, signified, but never fixed. But never fixed on understanding how much condition blackness and not only general theory, surveillance, racialized surveillance, subject race remains under theorized, really translation, and trade, particularly courtesy surveillance, something not created by new technology, see this not understand this, and like some understanding intersecting surveillance, not present ordered by intersecting surveillance, not regulated practices, performance, and policies regarding surveillance, not very invisible, unknown, yes, sometimes with that black dark matter, dark matters, a way to think about race, the substance, dark matter, and then these events, black, sovereign, perceived, watching, way dark matter, desires, for your our confidence, door, looking for race, and which surveillance is not expensive, black workers, black man, black may have many things, and focus on the world, so the individuals will look for organizations, things, person come under investigation, and like this person, your performance, you do not exist. It's hard to imitate people's existence here to be made known by their gratitude to this day, and I use surveillance, sociology, population, and management technology, this day, to pick up translation, and entities, surveillance technology, brings slave markets, not to black exercises, not because black owners and futures, like not just slave marriage, creative techniques, for moments of refusal, and critique their revealed social life and slave condition, and detail, finding the everyday action problems, the implication of Western legal subject is impossible for racialized bodies, the historical narratives, legalities, the deities, the law, and domestic legibility within Western common law, maintains the nation's active investment in the state, ensuring that the human as such can sustainable for years to follow exposure to those who might have access to loss in your locker, comma, 7. More churches makes it just death means those subject to computer with the permission law for using all people in the direct procedure station version just been subject by means of violence made like believe by some sort of word law for people bear like an necropolitan rising body and always seems more of power to watch and give them to the state law originates about to live by violent legal animal one another tradition legality with single rising anxieties about laws is an actual displacement of little and legal return to course of robbery wrong professions magic the constitution post poly the oxy legal issues a Peter off basic mensuration as the other making progression ever more authoritative disorder when the disorder is evidence of law is necessary the fact weapon of everyone which exacerbates law for the court from utopia saying which human nature may have from you which is an affection from the loss of the life one of the still cultural vision from residential communities everything exists here in the shadows of the law one's government national police service one's our organization shadows they are providing protection in this message justice social order itself becomes like a hall of mirrors that will stop you taking all that knowledge you don't over the existence of those followings purview. These decisions in other jurisdictions, some kind of law lobby can have making sure focus on the top of the board, any kind of national architecture, legalities, or whether it's in the market. Perfect. Cross it.
You good? Yeah. What modern surveillance assemblages are A, causing material detriment to the social groups isolated by the 1AC, and B, as a result, or
my argument
as a
isn't
result
that
of
they're inherently a multiplicity of surveillance assemblies, rather the surveillance is itself a larger or meta-theoretical assemblage that we can use to conceptualize specific instances of that.
I get that. What surveillance programs?
When you ask the question,
what's an example?
You don't get that.
Sure, it's an assemblage, so like there's a multiplicity, but what's an example of one?
We would say the Brown evidence gives examples of things like census taking, biometric surveillance.
The census. Okay, biometric surveillance just means identifying someone based on a biological trait. Like, what's an example of that?
We would say things like facial recognition technology.
So facial recognition, where does that exist? Like airports, maybe?
Well, we say that facial recognition is used in a security measure
Okay.
in a bunch of places.
So biometric surveillance, like if we read a DA of biometric surveillance, that's like something to look at, yeah?
Wait, it depends on the dissent. If it's biometric surveillance bad, then we would agree. You just said it just had about biometric surveillance. That's a very vague term.
So The Gomes evidence describes how the strategy of the 1AC is like learning to survive in a space of death. I get that argument. What after the 1AC or
It's not merely a process of survival, but rather this process of survival and the creation of value within those spaces.
Okay, how does like reading the 1AC, like what affectively changes in this debate to create like an increase in that strategy, or like makes that strategy more effective, or implements that strategy? What is reading the 1AC?
Well, we believe that the reading of the affirmative is the injection of a research agenda into a community that we say is ultimately parasitic, not only upon death in an abstract sense, but uniquely in the context of the surveillance topic, parasitic upon the notion of surveillance as a
your research agenda,
whereby we must debate specific mechanisms of surveillance while obfuscating a larger field of how and why it operates.
And what does the app do about those like larger mechanisms?
Well, we say that the process of dark matters or critical confrontation with our not only investments within these various forms of violence, but the ways in which they come about externally as a process that allows us to reorient our various or more specific.
What about individual reorientation stops like the NSA from collecting bulk metadata?
Well, it's not simply an individual reorientation, right? But rather one of the research agendas that we propose.
Well,
and the ways in which
if the community is truly parasitic, then like the research agenda you inject doesn't do much. What does it do to like challenge those larger structures?
Well, our argument is one of toxicity, right? That the research agenda of the app is one that runs counter to the ways in which debates in the status quo function, thus rupturing debate to a point.
So just like we're talking more about broader surveillance and that like spills.
Well, it's not just talking more about broader surveillance, but rather reconfiguring communication.
What happens after we reconfigure it? Like what happens to this bad shit?
Because the ways in which we understand and interact with these systems and within them is something we believe to be a perfectly challenges. If your argument is that debate doesn't solve every problem ever, okay. This is peninsula stuff. Okay.
Yes, I suppose I do.
I'm not tripping about it. Symbolic gesture. I just want you to know.
Alright, this is pretty crazy. I guess I have people to thank as well. I'll start with my parents, who were very supportive, and especially in the money department, funding our team through basically our entire season. And I'd like to toss on the rest of the parents as part of the booster club that supports our whole team, traveling essentially everywhere. We wouldn't have gotten far without them. Next, I'd like to thank Courtney Shower, our coach of the whole year, as well as the rest of the coaching staff, who have been essential and putting in a lot of intensive work all year to make sure that our small team is able to succeed on the national circuit. It really means a lot. Particular coaches that are helping us at this tournament, so Laugry, the entire Trinity staff, as well as the Kentucky teams and staff, who've been working very hard for these last few debates in particular to get us ready. I'd like to shout out and thank teammates Sam, Kieran, Devin. Their support was vital, and of course Dan, right here for winning all those NAIC debates and teaching me a whole lot about debate and how to win debates and get into the surveillance topic. To know one who knows more about the topic than him, and it really means something to have him on our team. All right, with that, it's 3 off in the case.
I got it.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't putting
Oh.
Alright.
Forget your own partner name.
I did a thank you speech. Also, you also didn't say no one.
Well, I figured that forward. I thought that put you in the whole.
All right,
That's not how email works. I don't know. I did it.
All right. Okay.
Let's take a second. use 7 seconds.
Okay, everybody ready? All right. First is topicality interpretations, a curtailment to restrict websters 15 or curtail is to restrict something. Second, that refers only to outright prohibition, not any action that has the consequence which increases the skill. Any further help that restrict means outright prohibition, that consequence not equal to prohibition. USFG should restrict the stable agent mechanism that restricts the three charge, in this instance, the account of the urges action should continue putting intellectual policy into action. Three government principles charges of others like Oxford, and there are 2 impacts. First is fairness, side bias, means not spending clear discrimination mechanism makes a point after others, for against them, ignorantly actual today, I think to radically recontextualize the arguments of the test system, when you see anything traditional competition standards like permutations making really difficult. Second is when they stable resolution makes their other shapes looks disadvantages, corner-opposites, counter-opposites, and any answer from the suggestion clash, which is central advocacy and education, also instead of best faith with a truth and information is opportunities both limits, and it's a worse debate. Second, effects and mechanism education is really identified for mechanism changes must have seen effects on the quality of debates, leads that makes the comparison accuracy means the detail over pigs on the substance possible next test the next picture federal church don't surveillance mechanism education is keeping effective persistence case channel like 2010 highlights the effect of the third one through to be elections will then the insert of the not to be person of private support for the city procedure but it's take a political for others we expense today really well this thing was as a creation of system of produce domination there's no church to spend and the human question of the other whether it's not the external accountability so reality is it in terms of inequality in church and you want to oppose and learning to seize power through debating it's just that makes the more effective political strategy alternatives and many firms analysis being truth the power can I create a new political organization that becomes powerful appears with the political black political organization is effective when it targets strategy government strategically and pragmatically spends $15 movements are also wants to be able to turn themselves to argue because that's still illegal because of the all this is like there's some because everything we can play back with much like you said there's this organization the version Maryland there was just no perspective like I said the city hall on serious stuff on the server work with the closest to that this is what we're going to watch for a couple of years right now recognize that most of the center circle for most of the world in which we're going to service to the sea part of the future or speaking truth to the alternatives and the local certain marketing cities of the church will furnish us with the best of the world also fundamental local all display and certainly organizing the suggestion level of the student managers got come to accomplish the church that makes a problem space accommodation solution to be fair or to be expressed in a level with people having space to talk about these things you have to concrete and marketing the question of people that don't say or the personal position of the local thing is to get to the organization but this people don't know services not people will put it no people to sustain to people that are circulating local people will like to policy will go from the benefits of those policy university infrastructure how we policy so fully out of that and the public wasn't like there are far more and the team version gets all the making imperfect but opens up political rights for returning continuing progress towards the end of racial balance when not in for doing the legislation makes sense and some Christ made a political justification of the logical to grow laws and there's the information for the possible and or because I don't know this well possibility to make single one of its president early because trajectory begins. Next is the pig. We advocate the practice of the affirmative except against the DNA surveillance from sexual self-verification that competes biometric surveillance includes DNA surveillance for making out of it. Who's their name, verification is which person can identify the difference between DNA genetics and also counter sexual conduct murderers that unacceptable cannot be. So these are the this I can facilitate made those more supportive records or DNA focus on speculative and there are other basic profiles or one of the students from the DNA sample search and basic holdings what uses to to solve crimes. Next is the critique that are sort of less than much of the privacy of capitalist exploitation. This records to make capital from strategic terrorism or the goal rejecting the economic system is the direction of terrorism by exploiting control less of this mentalities and something like where economic equality of the centralization of the like commercial review privatization and politicians are like racial responsibility to much cars which will follow our official coalition outer coalition to be very economic equality for the nationalists like to maintain social less on the centralizing to oversee the use of distract the from problem economic injustice and capitalism causes the inevitable crisis inequality is a class between the system of the space records to our freedom socialism on the horizon plan and for less than some of these are accountable to this mission of forcing a the term world most to find the channels and humans to shoot able to wants to go to until there's a situation realities of parallels we have those like those in the city on charity or challenging the female assumption that can pass the corner but it's not like plus also the base version of the class of different strategies is embracing this new generation but there's a certain mission that can work to alternatives case civil society is good development of individuals and informed citizens critical determining rights abuse of the courts that 11 human rights atmosphere getting better we can find or continue legal activism scale less control of political and the worst violation goal these 20 governments is also believe until we have to move to back to the administration reform for our lives in civil society, so it's a little bit that human rights actions from the recent documents of from the entities from the average should be personally those with more friends of the course of Western preparation on churches legacies better that is the impression that there's appears to be process behavior in generate the process of using so much for person of where this is new for privilege a progress that goes to the it's just like the quote that there's the intrusive and took their whole technology is presented over specific reasons of ways that say there's a little second probably wants to pick up this and you know like campaigns more it's like first until this year place where she writes to their phone quality that's a person study and then like much more substance abuse but much more disability recently heard the more because the assumption of your chief with a particular constitutional way we go for constitutional information and when he doesn't solve the moral structural problems with surveillance which is crossing there and it can deliver there's no this is not a disobedient surveillance we said that malicious when wax 14 national street state in all of the death country for the Rose 1990 and 1984 military representative you know from the Washington is now really the existing money quantum person that exists for FBI it's just one notification that is not as this international street state that you will the Washington is also to the other Washington protections in the other street that becoming your three national street state units is not your system testament to all of those are making its limits and said and from this ubiquitous surveillance to racial justice, I'm showing 13 immediately. Commission has to be surveillance, the surveillance to eradicate crimes, CCA, reduction of police brutality, mass surveillance, and help mass to be already on the court because the power zone, producers, power review, peace of Texas, reporting system, goal and majority, like power diffraction, cities of beauty, with British crime can also be expected to be racial, to jump resources, also all the new humans, and such as essential parts of this, you see the social life, much of the police to enforce them, and institutions are enough. Okay. No one answered March the or no one event marched them on the outset of modernity for racialized exploitation. I mean, starting with the genealogy of passages, universal explanatory for current surveillance fails not for vertical purpose perspective systems social or human position. There's no way that commercial secondary but so the customers technology are articulate models that just like that runs on the hierarchies reforms of the hierarchy organization. Next right. All right. Movements in the states shape each other. Reforms need to keep concessions not for this little civil settings, direction these forms so that the operate working state each other with working in the state, separate citizens, one state, the other, which is improvements, or documents of the states will say which refers to the nation to submit to change of consolidation and survival strategies fail to help people engage with current technological change it's impossible to face with background change foreseeing additional burdens and bodies under to be heard in different during this studies are your one of the issues of other non-technology spend on technology issues should benefit the other information transfer analysis and averaging techniques for this one stage use with English ability to service interested in visual balance running to view and professional systems in this respect there's the races both of the sensor universally with the sense of biometric illustrates ability to produce the identification documents going to analysis have serious issue will be flat. That's it. I'm good for process. I'm good.
Cold evidence says civil society is good because it allows for things like the Bush administration did stuff like release 500 prisoners from Guantanamo Bay. After 40 years, Reagan gave reparations to people who resolve these things. My question is, how are these instances of progress?
Okay, so yeah, this cold evidence is really good. It says that even though the reforms may be imperfect or small, they are significant, and not only that, but they sort of refocus the conversation and prove that executive power or surveillance overreach is not an end-all be-all. It can be curbed to some extent by the advocacy of like legal activists. Our evidence gives the example of like releasing detainees from releasing the torture methods.
That's fine. The Waxman evidence and this Armstrong card say that surveillance isn't ultimately that bad because people aren't really surveilled that often. Will the negative defend that surveillance is unique, or that surveillance isn't malicious equally for all?
Okay, so yeah, surveillance does target some bodies more than others, that's fair, but the examples given in the 1AC do not point to like an intentional, so yes, things like facial recognition technologies are obviously problematic. The problem is that the 1AC does not offer like a silver bullet example of a racist technology.
This evidence isn't a criticism of the affirmative's failure to present a policy solution. It just says that surveillance and the status quo isn't that bad.
Yeah, so
will you defend that?
The short answer to this question is like, yes, surveillance targets some bodies more than others. Overall, the surveillance state is not malicious.
That's fine. The criticism, what about the one they see that ignores capitalist activity?
it's not about ignoring capitalist exploitation. It's about the stance you take in response to it. The 1AC stance of retreat and run away from surveillance in essence would be would run counter to a capital theory or a socialist alternative of coalition around the idea of economic exploitation as center to anti-blackness. So you're specifically
cool.
your analysis of
Wait, that's
middle
cool.
class-
Framework. What's the impact?
I think the Chandler and Dean evidence outlines the impact as a form of deliberation that makes us unable to challenge larger
Yeah, in the context
How
of
many
what's-
more debates about surveillance do we need before we attain the skills
okay,
or evidence?
First of all, cuts both ways because my cross-ex's about like debates about the app and the 1AC.
I really don't care why you don't like our app. My question is, how many debates do you need to solve your impact?
It's not like a quantifiable amount of debates. It's about
Okay, so if you can't give me a number about how many debates,
What am I
you
going to
need,
say? Like,
why does this
it's
one
about
matter?
the model of debate that you justified. That's like what this debate will be about.
Okay, why does the model of debate that we justify matter on the last debate of this topic?
Again, it's a question of research. Research.
Yes, it's the last debate of this topic. Like,
Okay,
probably a lot of people are watching it. Like, it's a very significant debate. It shapes how people view the topic. And
the Chandler evidence.
Are you good? Yeah.
Wait, did you read the Highland stuff?
So we read the like note one event marks the or whatever one part. Actually, yeah, I read every event concept and the one on two. So yeah.
All right, that was 1 second. So.
So I guess I also have to do this thing. But I probably should have prepped for this. But I would like to thank, I guess, starting off as well as parents, definitely having a tremendous impact, not only in actually starting my debate career and inspiring me to take the class, but also being able to fund kind of the journey that we've taken this year. But also I'd like to thank my coaches, Rosie and John, who's in the grind with us throughout every day, all day, dealing with us through all the stuff we put them through. I definitely thank you for that. Also to the Baylor squad, even though I did betray them and decided to go to Wake Forest instead. I would like to thank them for all the work they've given to help me beat this man. But also thanks to Wake for helping incorporating me within their system. Definitely love you guys and can't wait for next year. But I guess that's it. Oh yes, and specifically Sam and Aldi definitely for not only since 11th grade sticking with us and kind of recognizing the potential we had and kind of shaping us into debaters that we kind of enjoyed being like this.
Sam and all?
Also,
You also forgot your
This man forgot me in the ego chain and Alright, so It's gonna be case, then the line by line, one case, then
So like
overview, then answering the cards, then framework, and then where you go cap? Oh yeah, cap is last. So wait, no, cap is first actually. Sorry, the case second.
Okay.
Or third. Yeah.
Right.
Say it one more time.
Case,
Okay.
overview, cards on case,
Okay.
then framework, cap.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So do you want like a new flow for the overview, or do you? All right. I just sometimes you never know.
It could be interesting maybe later, but I don't think it's not gonna matter.
Okay.
Domestic surveillance is walking racial slavery to make containment instruction of black flesh and all present reality technology become developed. Unobserved typical whiteness in a system marking categories and differences, hiding protecting white, something the nature of black mobility and freedom. The one who sees a call for dark surveillance rather than asking for a change in surveillance rule with the top of you respond to surveillance of evolution and anti-black issues for surveillance such as branding and middle patches, the foundation of enactment of logic from modern surveillance and prefer offer the possibility for future practice of intergenerational connection. The name of black and survival becomes evidence of the located unsettled in multiple layers of surveillance and use of discipline and control control bodies.
I'll go to framework and come back to case. Alright, cool.
The coke evidence is terrible, the only one that gives us suicide, even if it's Bush. Already this fine from Guatemala, this example of fucking terrible one issue. Bush was one to create a game on the first place, is trying to warrant this progress. Progress arguments on our project, the historical whitewashing, and obviously it's how power creates problems for them in order to obtain it. Imagery reflexivity, we agree, we don't solve on terror surveillance, that's the point of the one to see arguments that critical relations in the law and university can be a vehicle. Momentary incidents that escape from the system. Also, it's easy to say the surveillance isn't that bad. You're a subject to be first when walking down the street and prison for drug crime and sharp on the country. We agree that when you accident evidence is that surveillance is a solely plan of the in 1948, but rather a manifest of your aggressive technology relations, stemming relation to the body and subsequently grab. Crypto one hand evidence, one we agree that single event can be a foundation of marketing. The one is the isolated middle classes and slavery as they started point of the way this.
It's as distinct phenomenon to most classic events. I'll get to the oh, that's it. And go to.
You should view this as an creative convert and complacing not only within the law but within the space. Voting acts as a forceful confrontation with the violence of omnipresent reality for racialized bodies. Anytime you feel compelled or persuaded by the arguments that I think of the structural condition that allow for this debate to happen, or the forms of violence that a result of their attempt to exclude our from the various other forms to create a discussion of surveillance in context of our race and violence. You must start taking the subject at the heart of all politics reviews, thusly accepting mystical paradigms of this space and surveillance. We roll the battles to go for the best vision, the top of the best located to cross racialized surveillance with their productivity side of force productivity on certain bodies arguments deemed use of the community like slaves would be to make them more productive. Also, we should have to negative all impacts to explain how all their impacts explain how we create a parasitic growth of the law debate, which is how we destabilize the within the activity. Also, we need the United States in the assembly of individuals, not a monolithic machine turning out policies. We refuse to select the political will of the oppressor claude. ADA sovereignty is not single state, which is not which is even not also political potential to develop the acts together. We refuse to adopt states that can just compare also our policy to create rapid provocation when making policy come back to elective execution. We should make carrying out policy the automatic government and automatic machines to convert decision to action. Formation of being provided to favorable resistance to some authority to students with all the present all contributed cautious contributing response to government to fully charged never change the union purpose and system of the retreat that the theory attributes. And also we need cartel. They wanted to use a curtailment of surveillance be the process of making the body disappear. We met because we incited disidentification with an individual particular position on a representational grid, which is how surveillance manifests itself. Also our interpretation of the act must relate to the topic of climate change and decides what the media to change their method reason for our interpretation. Also both their model made one not for losing our other always engaging resolution is a permission of like here also we produce events in political subjectivity they don't want to see because we conduct your supernatural temporary surveillance and how it manifests how it sentiments and like structural antagonism with cultivates future forms of resistance around the show of anti-black life also neutrality this had our brown evidence of desire to change the form of life which is presented of multi-narrative neutrality surrounding surveillance study this was all bodies were positioned in the same way and all affect surveillance the same way the fault reason ability to engage in the case means you should resist one another that fairness arguments also really fairness opinion and fairness thank you 8 minutes and one is the office of special the research of the app establishing procedural terms of things arbitrary law we should to exclude black debaters who mean every terms used to establish debate or rating favor solely functioning network politics so there's no real fairness within the debate the one and I think of the last 3 judge panels we had consisting only white males with many judges of color with many judges of color being passed out we are saying it's an intentional act but rather a structure of anti-black existence within this space and should be aware of because we are filtering when filtering your decision on what impact it will on also predictability bad age arbitrary predictability means different things to different people also different so they don't establish. As a show rapper, the tool we need to be in this round for all go to the Chandler evidence. They don't say anything about mechanism education or the ability to for the negative impact for federal action is a standard for ground. This evidence in the context of political protest. Stop. You want to see our argument. There's always been the protest fail in this and choosing the witness, which is well, which is why our noble strategy that from this heat undermine power. They can see the power and say so be the capacity map and know the action body, which is why. So that the strategy fugitivity results also we impact our education will code up all word of articulation still arguments for death and arguments theory. Theories of already studied million times before destroying education. A good thing because open space of creation new forms of knowledge and that benefit to the permutation. Also debates or debates are good. Debates about debates because one sees foundational approach to the resolution is change the time of conversation arguments and over the pressure topic philosophical rights and negative topic all point with defender. The liberal model classroom want to see which means the impact on the apple the skills for education like this and that. But there's no intrinsic reason why reading the affirmative of the reading our reading the affirmative of the topic should be banned also they could have really needed as a method design like actually they did read capitalism. It's all capitalism is a method design, which means they get offense. Also, multiple rounds all their offensive debate house about traditional, non-traditional arguments ranging slowly internally to prove education that's never we have no honor. I'll take the threshold how many north debates is necessary, which means we shouldn't and say that cultivate different forms of engaged higher education that's not include their show using the vote on topicality as a disciplinary regulation of knowledge serves to offering debaters of the solution composed by multiplicity debates also refuse to either offering the debater for proliferating difference as a broad evidence. There's no topic version we had to set them up and need simply resolve particular answer to the balance of the state obviously it's a discussion around larger paradigm but there's just an infinite also land and all this at the same time the system of evaluation, the categories and types of knowledge are allowed. They tell us our resistance is fine as long as they don't resist much of the form of disciplinary logic that pre-established the defines of the resolution and bleeds into our necro logic often. Capitalism permutation with what I see is that our resistance to racial segregation of future practices is evolved with designing new value besides what it promotes economic exploitation that dispense marginalized population in wanted a seasonal location targets advance and structural anti-blackness and actually cultivate future politics resistance advance and means that even if they win they're all as good we have to do affirmative to be record to any of their strategies also wrong after we discussing all of the statements come out and speak to kill certain their kills are announced instead of can account for our street intrinsic value do what they like how we resist power the one I see which towards that go through the value also the after to be records and understanding the repression one day want to see specifically the sound discussing how ways of life interacting within society, found upon safe without understanding why. Also, the position of also understanding capital also means that's so then they have to be reconciled. All happening and explain which response to the slave again, slave lynching, where the slaves and body blames or work condition plantation, not economic beneficial beneficial that sell out makes a general explanation, stuff like also permutation, whole bunch of alternative and down ritual attention there. We have to understand the contingent truth of both argument in order to create a better starting point in order to resolve both the impacts of the affirmative value, create the alternatives and new technologies to advance the men we abandon particular future responses to advance the favorite clear-cut universal strategy collective anti-capitalism resisted the reinforcing the old world ethos and demand stuff. Also support harder, faster, and more responsible for collective political good, cross-highly productive productivity is tied to them. This will also we want to see it's an obstacle and want to see the obstacle with this advance commercial capitalism anti-blackness creative effective form of control the object position of state freedom control relationality with the features that have been slowly enacted through the development of cultural technologies and aim to work upon inflation. This process version is converted to commodity. We already historical material and also the different codification of this process go to the fungible ability to satisfy and attempt to capture the parts we want to see they view as we're not thinking for the world view cast off the other parts of deviant. This is an authenticity argument rather than the big assumes that they want to see was a property in the first place which requires a model progression subjectivity that imagine with capacity and intentional self-position we have a co-authors in this having level of form even because a radical concept the PIC has solved biometric database will only contain data on individuals who have already been incarcerated previously, meaning that even if the PIC also ranges in the database, everyone else is still out there also law of fair disad they come with complex and perfecting Western legal subject investment in corners and side of freedom and particulization of sexual assault and murder case of public justification because the investment in Christian industrial complex writ large. Okay, so that was writ large.
Uh, 30 seconds used. We have 9 minutes. Yeah.
Yep. Top of the case page, you define your strategy as a critical relationship to the law. What does that mean?
I think it's a critical thinking of how we engage within the law, right? We always see the law as a site of agency or a site where a place where we can, I guess, siphon our affect into its particular, I guess, functions and do what it wants us to do.
What are those functions?
That's the entire point of the F, right? We can't ever know these forms of, not forms of violence, but never understand the ways in which these systems operate, but rather engaging in dark surveillance allows us to
So we can
cover
understand
those
that
systems.
surveillance.
No, we say
is violent.
we can understand that surveillance is violent in particular instances, right? The techniques they use in order for violence to manifest itself is something that is
I have
ultimately
a couple questions.
ununderstandable.
So
Something we can attempt to understand via
in the case overview, you made the argument that like the 1AC is a strategy of finding ways to like hide away from the overall surveillance state. I remember that phrase being used. I was talking when I was asking Peyton, who's like the app is like rethinking. What exactly is the app's method for solving, or is it like a fugitivity argument?
I mean, like, there's multiple components. I think the one you're specifically worried about is our ways in making bodies unintelligible, right? Or like ways in which surveillance, I guess ways in which we can evade surveillance.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we say,
No, I get it. The productivity DA on T, when has a social movement been successful and not productive?
I'm confused on what
Your argument is like productivity bad. When has a social movement been successful and
the
not
1AC is
productive?
not a social movement. If you would listen to the 2AC, that was the no link.
When has any good ever been done that isn't productive?
I mean, it's a question of what your productivity is, right? We don't say that productivity is
But
bad in an
your-
abstract.
your
But no,
functions-
listen to the link argument. The link argument is your imposition of that productivity, right? The idea that you say that we must engage in debate in a particular way, that we must have certain understandings of the resolution or ways to engage in the resolution is something that forces us to engage in those particular strategies, which we say is bad. It's not a question of productivity, but rather all of our link arguments in the context of you
Right, yeah,
imposing.
Can you explain the argument that's like vote after vote?
Sure, we say that you winning an impact on this, on the framework flow means that we have disrupted the way that normative debate, I guess, exists, right? And via that disruption, we can create moments of,
and then I know, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
And
no,
then, other stuff, is there like other reasons to reject the team if we don't go through any of these arguments?
I mean, not as
Okay. And then are debates about debate good or bad?
debate about debates are good also.
Then how is it unfair that we did the 1AC by reading framework?
Sorry, what?
If that's true, then how is reading framework a competitive method of debate bad?
If debates about debate are good, the framework is a discussion about which model of debate is better.
That sounds like it's good because debate's about debate. How would you have us debate about debate without framework?
Wait, what?
How would we debate
It's fine, it's fine. We're starting with 9:20.
My timer is going.
The argument you made at the is for the sake of research. Do you know that?
Reading the framework.
Is it okay. Oh, is it?
Also tell me that you think you can to support your heart.
Okay, stop there. We have 4:55.
How much left?
5.
Okay.
Taking away stuff.
Yeah, that's a first.
I think it's just like all every time.
Okay, adjustments.
Hey, Caitlin. Hey.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I also have a lot of people I'd like to thank. I think Peyton was spot on in talking about like the community. I've made a lot of my best friends in this community. It's helped shape me as a person from like a 9th grader who is kind of a dick to someone who's like less. It's good. But I mean, debate has encompassed just like such a significant amount of my life that despite its flaws and despite sometimes feeling burned out, it's just really important to me in the fact that everyone participates and puts a lot of effort into, you know, being supportive, especially of me, and, you know, us is really helpful. Got a lot of great friends in this community, people from all sides of like from all areas. I mean, the debate community sort of shaped my sort of social group. I have great people who have helped me from Blake, Peninsula, Westminster, even like y'all. Debating you has been one of the best educational experiences for me, and you've been great competitors throughout this entire year. And I always feel I've like learned something or get better at debate from debating you. The camps that I've been to, the DDI was awesome at sort of helping me branch out and look at different types of debate. I went to the SDI and the Hoyt Spartan Scholars Program, which I think is fantastic for learning about like specific stuff in the topic. I'd like to thank Bill Batterman and Repco and a bunch of other people who participated and helped me learn a lot. Last thing, coaches, Courtney has put in far too much time into our program and has spent a lot of her life here, and I owe her a large debt of gratitude for helping us even get to tournaments. Everyone else who's helped along the way. Logri is here, and he's been super helpful. Mikey Friedman coached us novice year, and no one here knows who that is, but he was a pretty wild guy, but certainly helped me with a lot of stuff. All the people who were at Highland my freshman year, and then we were the only people on the debate team. Marie and Ellen were some of the seniors that helped me learn a lot of stuff. Last thing, Ian has put up with a lot of my shit in debates and has taken far too much. So I really respect how much work he's put into this activity and the fact that he's been able to deal with me when I'm not great. That's not a really good way of putting it, but you know, thank you all for helping me get here, and I'm gonna give it to UNC now. So the order's T. Yeah.
Yes, do everything.
Okay. Is anyone not ready? Cool.
It's evidence to cross extended podium improvement does not change anything discussed with see. There's only risk of more impacts that DJ does not answer very well. First is procedural fairness, training substantive goods based on discussion is the foundation of it. Without stasis, there's no source for data because the change that would seem to research the same thing as supposed to know. So one is sci-fi, the lack of specific mechanisms to make cellular possibly negative. We are given a limited number of responsive arguments, the lack of constraints allows them to radically recontextualize like arguments and shift the goalposts of the evidence. We see on top of that we still have access to traditional arguments like the permutation that they got out of our cap king on decisivity residual ground subway because limits topic exists for a reason, but that's stable limit topic we lose all access to disadvantages counterpoints basically any answer to the we did all the homework and their quiz on a different subject limits that way because they're key to clashing debates we can test arguments develop productive pedagogy to ensure these higher acts second impact these mechanisms of education opposite of the specific actor mechanism for change to lose all nuance in educational but that's the reason why Bojo or the cap can't answer are also popular in terms of all their critical education good offense because that's people default to negatives or shallow absolute arguments in hope of getting close to the specificities to point the chill or assistant you see uniqueness for this argument is the lefties faulties are feeling this task with their strategy of opposition to entire social systems lots of continuation of this task with their oppositional to surveillance but they have no idea what to do about that or the biometric surveillance that's causing massive inequality in this task with their only approach is to recontextualize or rethink how that's happening but it does nothing to challenge the material amounts that's happening in this school. They've dropped about 2 minutes of surveillance to be good education off into the one and see the coal evidence and the evidence and the one and see says that specifically learning about this specifics of policy surveillance and the way that that's implemented that allows us to resist in the future. The coal evidence will be more in the one and or the evidence that was at the bottom of the T-flow says that specifically in the context of black political organizations in Jackson, Mississippi, Maryland, the Malcolm X grassroots movements and Black Lives Matter have all helped resetting the national conversation even if their reforms haven't been perfect but proves that sometimes higher education is good and turns the rest of the affirmative is also key to spilling up and creating more productive change. Topical version of the F you can discuss the way that the NSA conducts racialized surveillance tracing back to the middle passage and the collection of that bulk metadata that was an affirmative that was put out on campus predictable allows for effective negative offense but still maintains the affirmative's ability to discuss the rest of their impacts. Now the first argument is that it's a confrontation. We do not preclude a confrontation. This fundamentally does not lead to our argument because you can confront the way that racism is intertwined in the debate community, but also justify but also read a plain that says that the United States federal government should curtail some of its domestic surveillance system negative state action topics. So there's no offense by the state bad arguments in their common round evidence, because the whole thesis of the argument is that the state should be doing less things. You don't need to role play, and you can confront those things without making it a possibility negative. They say the role of the ballot is to challenge racialized surveillance. We think that we access that role of the ballot much better than they do, because our evidence says we can more effectively challenge surveillance as we understand the legal and practical implications of the way that those surveillance mechanisms are laid out and implemented, which means that we have a better method of accessing that role of the ballot. Also, role of the ballots are arbitrary and self-serving, and could be destroyed. The role of the ballot to vote F, which obviously should be rejected because it makes it impossible to be negative. They say the productivity dissect cross-ex proof that there's never been a social movement that's been that has not been productive, that has ever succeeded. Proves that there's no alternative to productivity. We also are not forcing them to be productive in the traditional sense. You do not have to produce anything or contribute to a larger capitalist economy or racist economy of suffering. Rather, you simply need to provide a stable ground for negative engagement. There's no link to this argument. It's also not supported by any evidence, and all these arguments TJ makes them to be serious, like 5-second flips. So blowing them at the 1 yard is not sufficient, especially because it's finals of the TOC, and this is not supported by any evidence. Just like 5-second assertions that are super flippant, don't make a ton of sense. A lot of times they say vote after make this argument rest on the assumption that if they disruptive it's good, which we are impact journey, so it doesn't make any sense. They say they mean because they critique the federal government as an assemblage. That does not apply. The Erickson evidence says that the federal government specifically means the government in DC means that you have to curtail surveillance that is done by the federal government. They critique larger surveillance, but they don't necessarily implicate any programs or any collection of information, which means they don't need this interpretation. They say the Claude evidence, this is 2005 greatest hits. It's not an argument. It just says that fiat would sometimes obscure the role of would sometimes obscure actual political process. Argument is that the research that goes into defending implementation is specifically better because it leads to understanding of the intricacies, which turns back the plot argument. They say the need curtail argument says it has to be a specific legal restriction, and that they do not mean that because they're not a legally codified restriction of surveillance, which means they don't provide a stable and limited base of the topic. They say that the counter-interpretations relate to the topic. Obviously, links to our limits is that because the app that says stop live streaming the round is topical. It's relating to the topic. It is surveillance. There's an infinite number of things that relate to the topic, and it's also infinitely rest because everything can say that relates to the topic in some way proves that there's some words that creating a more limited topic is better. There's also does not apply. There's no justification for creating some aspect of a topic when the rest of their arguments that are rules and constraints are bad. So the counter-interpretation applies in the face of the rest of their offense. They say permutation is terrible. It justifies the affirmative never talking about the topic ever. And in all other instances, we will have other debates. I will debate GBM inevitably, so you can be untopical. This is illogical. It doesn't make any sense because the affirmative would always race to the margins. It justifies terrible evidence. It's also a question of the method that you justify, which is conceded argument. They say the neutrality is that we are not neutral on any aspect. Our argument is that the topic is fundamentally agnostic about the role of the federal government, which means that there's no link to the rest of their offense. But neutrality doesn't apply because the affirmative can challenge the racialized nature of debate and surveillance, but still defend an instrumental implementation of a plan. They say reasonability. They are not reasonable. This debate was clearly outlined across this debate was competing interpretations of how debate should function, which means that this does not apply because they don't reasonably meet any of our standards, and it requires the counter-interpretation that makes some sense, and their counter-interpretation is not. They say that framework is bad because it's unclear. The framework argument is about discussions of debate, which is what their argument of the 2EC said was good. We are simply discussing the best way to make this. Also means that none of their lawfare arguments are offense because it is a question of the theory and procedural impacts in this debate, and whether or not the state is good or bad is relevant to this decision. These we exclude black debaters. That's not true. Our argument is not based on race or any sort of performance ideology. You can make any sort of impact calculus. Our argument is they simply have to defend the United States federal government should be doing less things, and it's a plan of action to do this. They say anti-blackness. Yes, we recognize there is anti-blackness within the community. This does not mean that you have to abandon all sort of instrumental action. There's fundamentally no tie between the affirmative and the rest of these arguments. They say predictability is good. This argument is untrue because breaking down predictability, self-defeating, impossible pure creativity requires the existence of constraints, obstruction, care, blanket, restriction on my country, on represented by no experience, and country connection, or step the one people, only one benefit, one source, pursuit, market, trade, content, trade, depend on the force of persons, the response on the military, strict, confused, broadcast, the other games, or risk, convenience, with myself, self-reduction, possible magic, can do it. So without the other opposing condition, exchange, non-consensual, or responsive, play, what's the way of conceptual, power, technology, testing, evidence, wire, context, seeing, determining market card, determining all arguments are framework arguments, which subsumes the majority of their offense. Exclusion occurs on arguments relying on false dichotomy because debate requires continual judgment of which arguments are persuasive, which can be dismissed. Even though this happens implicitly, the role of the negatives to try and say it was bad for they have to do what they did. The impact strong because we don't have the power to oppose, no, only to persuade you. Their argument in practice should be rejected. There's 6. Promise I want argument to be a much I want to oppose reason which is suppression of argument says homophobia, so they are protected even argument in favor of argument is not the case, argument in favor of reason debate. I'm mentioning the argument is distant, what you do, argue for to be a force of baptism, and enforceable, and simply argue for the procedural framework, the allegation of state system, and the correction that one place or trying to make arguments, tendency to give Kratos meaning every argument confronts argument has a component for the agreement to oppose the procedural time to book the administration of road codes on the adjudication of inhibition of action arts, also produced can be associated with the administration of obligated to argument procedural rule is that democratic culture where argument is not served by trumping appeals right in the market card there. They say that Chandler argument evidence is wrong. You are a political movement that is a distinction without a difference. Chandler evidence is talking about the ability of non-governmental reforms to solve it. That was explained in the overview. They say they impact your education. This is not true because the surveillance made education good offenses clearly explained additionally with the rest of our policy debate good offense, which will be explained more in the one another. They say debates are good. Yes, this just proves that the affirmative is not offense about the larger and norms about what should be considered by the debate community. They say that we have the cap. This is not an argument. The cap is a generic strategy that does not rely on any good scholarship. It proves that we need specificity. We had some strategy. Does not mean that it was good when they say multiple debates solve our offense. That was answered above, and the permutation justifies the affirmative never being topical. They say ours does not preclude your interpretation. Yes, but it's a question of the model of debate that you justify. You justify one where the affirmative would always run the margin of making it also negative. They say T is disciplinary, not necessarily. There's no justification why topicality is inherently disciplinary. Once again, our argument is simply that you have to demand instrumental action and that the United States government should be doing less oppressive shit. But there's no justification why T uniquely embodies that thing, that argument. There is a topical version of the app because you could combine your scholarship, which is the only offense, with a plan.
Yeah. All right. Do people race to the margins in the status quo?
Well, like, there's some examples of that happening, sure.
Sure. So, what about your interpretation for closest the possibility for that to happen after the judges vote neg?
Well, so like voting app does not stop people from reading the framework. Voting neg does not stop people from reading.
We don't make arguments about why I guess they're reading the framework. I mean, your arguments are centered around a model of debate or interpretation of debate. I'm wondering how you somehow can access that interpretation outside of this round. You seem to be making spillover arguments or reasons why your forms of education.
So our forms of education are good in that they inculcate a research process that is more effective at learning about the intricacies of government surveillance and thus challenging it. I'm not really sure what the question means in like the broader context because we don't necessarily
I'm wondering if it's a research strategy. Why does your debates with GBN not resolve on it?
Well, because the argument is that it's a question of what you justify. Like obviously, if the debate was about whether or not uniquely like what happened in one debate mattered, then like. This argument would never be correct.
Why is it a question
every
of what the judges,
could always
why
be
is it a question of what the judges justify or what you justify? Only your internal link is to us understanding more about the topic.
I'm not sure what you mean. So that's one of our impacts. Like, if we win the argument that this debate is about what you justify or like the model of debate that you are advocating, it disproves that argument. That's only one of our impacts, like education. But the rest of our impacts are based on ideas of like procedural fairness and just like how the negative should be able to respond to the app, which is
what pieces of ground or I guess what particular discussions in our interpretation are the reading of the 1AC precludes you from having it resolved?
So, well, there's like examples of arguments that we lose, right? So like disadvantages that aren't based on like generic surveillance disadvantages.
Sure, so are any of those examples, I guess, what is a reason why any of those discussions are necessary in this particular?
Well, the whole point of our argument is that like this particular round is not the nexus of the debate. Like obviously,
I guess what's the nexus of the debate?
Our argument has been consistent here. It's about what you justify.
Cool. What type of or on the Black Lives Matter? You said we sent your discussions, or that's an example of a topical version of the app. I guess how is Black Lives Matter an example of normative engagement?
Black Lives Matter group, after what happened in Ferguson, convened a conference where they wrote up a set of recommendations for like improvements to policing strategies, and those have been implemented to some degree. So, like,
sure. So is the 1AC's process of dark surveillance? So why is the 1AC's process of dark surveillance not that same form? I guess
the 1AC, So the 1AC calls for like a better understanding of surveillance policy, but it doesn't do anything further from that. The point is that your broad understanding of the topic or affirmation subverts specific strategies. When you use an
example of someone, I guess, isolating particular reasons or particular demands that they want to resolve, why is our particular demand, I guess, probably
because this round it's not just this round, it's about what you justify. It's been my answer like 6 times.
Setting out. You said it.
What is the order?
It's gonna be critique, the pick, and then the pick.
You said it.
Pick.
Pick.
Case is last. Is case last? I couldn't hear if you said
Yeah.
case or case.
Yeah, case is last.
Sorry.
You sent it out.
I did. No worries.
I'm still out.
Yeah, now it's in. Is everybody good? All right. Critique like over see the permutation, this is competition, they try and leverage anything you should let them concede and cross-X. Then out of its reason to vote against us, so there's no offense. They don't access the external impact. Critique out or pick, not going for it again. Same argument from they don't access any of it. Permutation, this is competition, they don't get to advocate in case. Then you all start with the coal evidence. Civil society makes progress against affirmative violence impossible. We cite this evidence is like 3 specific examples of how legal activism was specific remedy violence to push detainees. Case in, we grade photos and Korobatsu moral accidents, simple election was able to resolve their answer. This was literally just rereading the examples of than saying, well, that's all. Well, no, the answer is that this is obviously important. You should frame this around holistic successes, not just whether individual successes are important, because they're obviously imperfection is not the same thing as failure, because politics may be unstable and contradictory, but the underlying cause of performance ultimately success went on for well drill, but smart research structure of institutions, destroy research institutions, typically native and fail reason doors filled and covered by discipline, which nurture cause, research sitting in single that are doing yes, policy service and stable country, the historical moments away, the sheer preservation person and search culture, self-relation, equity, mother, well, let's look at these challenges, breaks in the system, transformation, your space, emotional sharing, severe plus of people when the British economic system changes companies challenges by employing reform. The argument they say that it only the argument they open that this only on this issue, so it doesn't matter is not applicable to us because they're literally saying they're just saying they're taking the same examples and running away from them. How is that any better? So there's not that often. So then the actual argument before the Armstrong evidence surveillance is that necessarily bad because running away from it is uniquely bad and it's contingent specific analyses of legal context of surveillance restrictions or key Armstrong evidence in specific instances of surveillance being good or racial violence things like body cameras, which all from regulations to regulations which are all again parts of legal activism. The next argument I'll go for which the uniqueness framing evidence is the piece of feminist evidence is an institution or are we gonna leave that? Oh, yeah, that's fine. All right, institution. Read the recard anyway. It's only a question of whether they're able to effectively handle political strategies and move that and effectuate action, rejecting school exposure or running away just doesn't work. Read not temporary interest for much more. Our next time, impulse system, or calling over, just like such taking effect for regulation, always, and such steps over taking the way direct from the legal utilization of short specific struggle to smooth the settlement schedules as much as the time of extraction of reason, think of like what's the negative which just receiving into place with such strategy generate administration like what the change stable association is substitute for an argument on expression makes much such long as petition to bond with regulation work just recently during the election much of seems to have been this part is supposed to work next argument but I'll go forth to the knockouts which were answered so poorly the middle passage is not the defining event of my journey, but it's literally takes out to defining truth claim of this affirmative. They have no offense on Freeman because it is all contingent on someone's slavery the defining event of people's existence and ability to participate in politics. The piece of evidence that the cumulative causation is events of modernity, i.e. racial coding for existed way before the middle passage specifically. It's a combination of racial hierarchies that have are transmitted slavery. This reason why it can be undone by undoing those in specific instances of things that the war forms are obviously able to work. The argument the next one on purpose said women are able to spill up and create new movements.
spaces argument one Mr. Stable, they create the political horizons for new ones, which solves the application, which solves their argument that like we only cause single instances and fixed problems that are undone because it opens new opportunities for politics, create new changes, which what the result is also we can represent the goals to fix their arguments about how their arguments about that don't work and come is wrong. Okay, on 5 the emphasis on the change of the future has been defeating my from the defeating my others, being my full thought. It's the generous social tradition is the interest of one in Europe, for example, select English while within such a country and normalize the common level skepticism of sin invention most of the political possible on your friendship self people so need for tradition which is structure of things about politics really members of the watch these days and video religious no Christians for watch for laws and receive them said by what's going on in the percent potential of those in the zoo are living in those colonial states the national legal force the national evidence of the watch card one says that specific laws creating the exact internal links of their culture talking about literally racist biometrics and like ancient blackness and it says that these are coded in specific laws that have to be reformed. It means that we access the only internal links to this the argument that they're only them just doesn't solve it. Literally says that these things we can't relate to because they are used to find people. So you're entire watching the argument doesn't make sense. So go back up to the one on argument. The argument that somehow modernity is a structuring event. They only presupposes the persistence of the passage which is used to deny agency to people in background. They don't have to come to the justice theory of abstraction. That is the books meant to translate the question to do something. Some non-livers have this one. Human scope of abstraction seems more than little so it might seem so that's right in the first universe scholarship. You should mention the critical system the other for the associated people control the trends of the first and the whole part of the scholarship and first the difference that comes from genres.
Yeah, there's no mechanism to resolve any of the stuff we talk
right.
about.
It's not easy. If there's no mechanism to resolve any of the surveillance mechanisms we talk about, that's
They're
outlined
like
by all.
rethinking surveillance, like fugitivity. They don't solve the
Right. They're about rethinking surveillance and fugitivity, but none of it is concrete reforms that actually solve the legal problems that they outlined, which is the threshold for solving any of the impacts they outlined.
1970s.
Yeah, that's what I see. Thanks. What is it? 6 what? 742? 743. I cannot hear anything, I swear to God. And I can hear the speeches though. Just not when other people are like talking.
Like, I got the same face. I just told them I didn't hear you last hour.
You don't think I'm listening? I'm
Just like faking it. Just like fake it, so I make it.
I'm just faking flowing. I'm just like writing like wind
I'm
in
just wasting
front.
decision time before we go. Sorry, I kind of forgot to stop.
Quick thing. What was the argument you made right before Brown and the one?
I just said that the application.
I think it was the Martinez part. Yeah, the Martinez. There was like biometric surveillance is because of specific laws that like we should talk about.
Good. Then no back. He took more of his prep work.
Hopefully it was necessary. You figured it out?
No. What are you doing? Order. Case. Then front.
Are you gonna go on his overview or straight to the line by line?
I'm gonna have an overview.
Okay, so just like the order they
And
went
then
in.
I'll be like, yeah. And then
Okay. Sounds good.
But on framework, I am gonna do the overview stuff first, like their overview.
Yeah.
And then straight up.
That makes sense.
Is everybody ready? Surveillance practices and mentality are only possible as a result of the foundation of policy of the plantation. How you citizens taking is a meaning catalog of citizens stopping frisk, policing, stopping frisk, policing for racialized bodies, prison, industrial complex, disproportion of minorities in the everyday. These are examples of negative political slaughter of racialized populations encountered via the manifest via process of normalization of bodies necessarily understood as abnormal and criminal dark matters obviously isn't the solution to every structural issue. Surveillance, but rather is slicing it as a topic in order to examine why surveillance itself exists in the first place. This is a process of critique that thrusting individuals into a point of discomfort and enforcing them the violent center of the very heart of modernity. The cold evidence is trash insofar as it only gives examples of things like Bush freeing people to be imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay, or Ronald Reagan paying people reparations 40 years after they had experienced suppression. They conceived a fundamental whitewashing this insofar as this evidence not only engaged in a liberal rereading of history that fundamentally mystifies the following method obscures the way in which the system created the very problems that it claims to solve and then touts those as reasons why you should prefer the law simultaneously. They can see the external impact of this argument that it infinitely replicates the impact. It infinitely replicates the errors of law insofar as the state must infinitely secure information and policy in order to sustain itself, thus making all their education arguments independent reason why you should be able to reject the law insofar as the more that we learn about it only draws us into in order to further push us away in the future. The affirmative logically is in action. It's only the deploying of critique is more is a model that activate people's agency, i.e. all of the stuff about dark matters that was explained at the top of the debate. Our argument isn't just to group all the arguments about just being a rejection of vaccine problematic. Our argument isn't merely rejection of surveillance, but an affirmation of self and a recreation of intrinsic value in the way in which we and a reconceptualization of the way in which we understand persons despite surveillance and rethinking the way in which resistance process and practice manifest themselves in modernity. We can agree with the wider evidence that there are multiple foundational points of modernity. That's why the 1AC is a continual process continues to overtrace and analyze the multiple ways in which slavery necessarily influenced surveillance. Quote from the 1AC Brown evidence. There are multiplicities of blackness, shit like that. The machine evidence is affirmative evidence insofar as it's only a summary of dark matters. Don't read our shit back to us. Try better. Do better next time. The Brown evidence is only an answer to Lotus, which fundamentally is the affirmative. We can agree that social death is fundamentally an untenable thesis. Our argument in essence, the affirmative has been that blackness is always creating moments of social life. The end social death be a process of recrafting self-independent and surveillance. So we agree with the app can resolve all these problems with the very discover that the affirmative creates the entire can be a way to destabilize the way that they function. That's right. The answers and evidence should be the filter through it. Did you use this as all of that framework arguments? It literally says, quote unquote, it literally says the procedural frameworks is something that are fundamentally unenforceable insofar as there are too many accesses in order to constrain them all, which means that their interpretation can't resolve any of their offense, dead, bad, discipline, the impact workers, the top of them, that's well, fairness first. Can't go forward. You can see the framework is the epitome of unfairness insofar as you directly silence 8 minutes of 1 AC because you didn't feel like talking about it. You should reject their interpretation of debate insofar as it allows the negative to arbitrarily shift the goalposts in order not have to get me any more out-based second fairness necessarily constrained. Is it fairness merely construction that had on the lives for the reason in order to protect the nationalized body? This particularly true of the TOC when we can't get black judges except when we get other black teams, except when we get other black teams. The education arguments group first, you can't go to these arguments. You can see the direct impact on the education and professional skills of their skills and education argument necessarily presume perfectible subject neoliberalism that only repairs bodies in order to more easily integrate them into a structure that founded on violence. They merely deputize individuals. They only merely grant individuals education in order to further deputize them in service of law. I.e., the TSA sees something, say something program, say the affirmative logically educated. The affirmative is an anti-archival education about surveillance, grounds, bound evidence. We use a meta-theoretical lens to understand the particular ways in which surveillance manifests itself via particular policy. Topical version, the app group first topical version is only a question of the implementation of specific mechanisms of surveillance, i.e. the how, well, never actually asking the why or why we surveillance first place. We should never hope to solve the affirmative parts of narrative, never interrogates the fundamental question of how we relate to other methods of surveillance as a practice. Secondly, continue to like the argument takes out any time where the affirmative focusing on singular manifestation of legal policies necessarily best possible large period of violence, i.e. the negative policy examples that we give in the top of the affirmative, given its top of the affirmative productivity, this is explained a little bit better on the education base. So what we did here, the counter interpretation results of the offense as far as the functional permutation argument. The reason policy education is good is the reason why K debate is bad. Limits are self-fulfilling prophecy insofar as you only study literature and your limits, which leads to ignorance of other theory, which leads to it becoming unpredictable. The predictability offense is also impossible to go for. We don't have to win. We break down predictability. Simply the imposition of predictability is a social sorting that allows you to eliminate your body.
Okay,
Justin, you.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. We trust you all.
Could be 7 or 6.
1 second. I mean, in Dan's case, though, you're just going to underestimate the time.
I can't explain it, but it's very like
Michigan Kansas, what?
they smell like Republican cigarettes.
True.
I love it.
I actually definitely been to church, but I haven't invested.
It's not working. That's not the case.
What's the order?
There will be an overview, yeah.
What's the order, sorry?
So, like T overview, then like T line by line interface.
Okay.
You all good? Cool.
Voting affirmative does not recognize or solving of the issues that the 1AC discusses. The 1AC simply attempts to recognize issues that are problematic with present surveillance, but there's no offense because they can't actualize any of those changes, which is a dropped argument from the 2AC, which means there's only a chance of our procedural offense because the question of what models of debate you justify, which is a dropped argument. They make the argument that debate to have debate are good. We are conceding that argument. They concede the argument that theoretical and procedural impacts that we have impacts about the affirmative and the nature of the affirmative because they can't solve those things, which means that the affirmative is ultimately not offense at the end of the debate, nor is there lawfare, calmer off cards, which I know will be a big part of the 2AR. The first impact I'm going to go for is procedural fairness. They have dropped the internal extent of these arguments. One is side bias being affirmative and not reading the plain means they can justify an infinite number of reshiftings of the affirmative and saying the one who is always already a stance against capitalism while still accessing traditional methods like the permutation to get out of core negative generics that makes it impossible to that because they can shift and approach generics. They've also dropped the limits argument that a broad variety of affirmatives makes it impossible to research core negative arguments like disadvantages, counterpoints, and even critiques that are based on method and justification of the affirmative based on the resolution. That makes it impossible to be negative because there's always an infinite number of things that we can't prepare for. Fairness is the underlying method for how is the underlying recipe for how debate works. Without fairness, there's no effective debates on any issues, which turns the rest of the case. Every good debate is a photo finish, which means that artificially imposing constraints or unfair models of debate is a reason to vote negative, or it is a reason to vote negative, even if they only harm the activity by 1%, because it proves that it proves the debate here was never fair because of artificial factors. Second impact is education. They've dropped that Clash turns the whole app because they justify no topic or a topic where people can say they relate to the affirmative, where nobody reads affirmatives that are germane to the resolution. That turns the rest of the case because nobody is ever clashing with each other or making arguments that interact. That turns the rest of the affirmative because we can never rigorously test ideas or arguments and makes their education plans ineffective. The rest of the education debates about government surveillance will be on the case, but nobody would debate mechanism, which is a critical argument. They drop the sheer limit as its uniqueness and says that movements are failing now because of an emphasis on rejection of social systems as opposed to a focus on how to challenge those systems. Which is the reason why the top version of the absolves they could read the NSA affirmative that discusses bulk metadata as advocate and add to that program and say that the bulk metadata is used to disproportionately target minorities based on racial prosecutions. That's an affirmative that we've read throughout the year. Their only answer to C version of the app is like we don't ask the bigger questions. You can obviously read the bigger question. We don't preclude that argument. It's a question of what you justify. So the rest of the arguments about this, we don't apply this to the Anderson evidence. This does not go affirmative. The argument in the 1 hour was literally there's too many axes. That is not an argument. It's not complete. It doesn't make any sense. Anderson says that exclusion is inevitable because every argument requires a subjective judgment on an arbitrary term. So it's only best to make those exclusions occur across reciprocal lines and make it so the negative has the ability to engage the affirmative. I say we silence the one. I say this is not true because you make being negative impossible from the start. Additionally, we don't silence the one. I say you make the argument that debates about a debate are good, so you can't go for this argument. Our argument is not one of silencing, rather it's an argument about what method of debate is better. They say fairness is the construction of norms. Yes, it's fucked up that you don't get black judges at the TOC. That's not something we disagree with. We can recognize those imperfections and those problems within the debate community and work to productively reform them. But there's no justification for not reading a plan. Literally, none of this offense is based on their ability or to read or not read a plan. So it should be the impact filter for the rest of their arguments. They say that fairness is a construction of norms. This is not true because fairness is simply an argument that the negative should be able to engage with the affirmative in a reciprocal method. They say education is bad because we deputize racism. This is not true. Surveillance education is good because it allows for activists to effectively reform. I'm going to do that reform page here. Frame these around the ones you and opposite events. Even if the when you never see reform, this ain't our perfect day. Have radical but actually get the incentivization of other social crimes. Think about this logically. There's things like Jim Crow would not resist them, but instead explicitly intends to retreat because it is a fun ontological position made by the middle passage. But resisting was the only way that any of other social movements, things that are good, like Black Lives Matter, even possible in the first place. This evidence says a black youth in Mississippi organizing grassroots movement that speaks legislation. Activists said Delmix in Maryland and Black Lives Matter also approved that engaging in policy structures are good. The without evidence says that civil rights legislation made possible any other against the 20th century. The Cole evidence says that civil liberties activism works because Bush released a bunch of detainees, Korematsu, and Abu Ghraib. Photos released of Martina evidence specifically in the context of the affirmative and literally outlines every internal to the codification of black suffering like biometrics and racial identity and the legal implications of also solving those truths that we've been which reason our education is massively better. They say that have as a meta-theoretical lens, but your theoretical lens makes it impossible to focus on the specifics, which is our argument. There is a T version of the other that was above in the overview. Productivity decided they've considered there's no alternative because no movement that's not been productive has never been successful. We cannot make you productive. We simply believe that you should make an argument that the negative can engage with. That does not mean you contribute to the larger system of the permutation. They've dropped it. It's a question of what you justify. So the permutation makes negative sense in this context because it means that every app would always be on topical and then say, no, don't worry, it's just us, which makes debate impossible. Limits are not ignorance. It's rather a realistic understanding that there's only a certain amount of things that we can talk about. They've dropped the arms from evidence that says independently during the predictability arguments because a set of constraints allows them to be more creative and create better scholarship. The only argument I'm going to go for in case because everything else has been covered is the argument that the affirmative misdiagnosis is the problem. The without evidence that the very basic of the middle passages, a historical ignores only of racism that is extended past the plan. It's not a whitewashing to make these arguments. It's just true history that turns the end.
I assume that's it.
Yeah. What's up? It's going to be case, then friend.
You must take a radical leap of faith and great birth in the midst of all the states, the plantation, laid the foundation of modern surveillance, evolutional paradigms, oversight, and shipping. Diaries, bread, and set of presidents, the templates, humanity, many violence against bodies who failed them. I mean, this frame of subjectivity, same subjectivity. We are political, project optimism, and future creation of community that's centered on building a space in which bodies able to affirm themselves are coming up and pretty good on this question of community space and building and creating intrinsic value within the face of the concept of against blackness. Also, they went link to any of their arguments that could possibly not the ball, especially when they have no defense. Coming out of 2 and our year, melancholy epic bills and the person you could paying of community desiring at the hands of minus left in the life. To affirm their only community must gather and affirm the joiners and the wake up back up our vast estimate of devoid of political agency, forcing the strategy just running away on those willing up to willing to give up everything, can gain anything that dark surveillance in the counter, reading the topic of retail's control techniques of plantation because that's right to me, which means we get 100% versus always in the test, so they have it on the test from the beginning debate. Also, they say go to the argument on the line by line, they whitewash history because they reconstruct it to favor the liberal left and reformist parties insofar as they give examples of resolving about the North system and the source of our own violence. Our Bush and Reagan examples are pretty good at showing that bad policies create the problem in the first place, which is behavior, which comes behavior over the reason you should affirm antagonism to the law is only a risk of complete withdrawal forces the system collapse within the telco to friends. 3 pieces of offense. 1 is the productivity side that they don't understand link to this argument. The link is not that you the productivity and productivity and arbitrary to something that's bad, but rather the imposition of that productivity on certain creating a certain amount of debate in the way that we must engage within that model of something that is bad enough where it creates forms of exclusion within the debate. Productivity takes on a potential state or good debate often to press arguments so far as they rely on Western liberal notions and private purposes to attract the raw energy in the body in order to recharge the battery and towards the humanist game will offer demand to work. The law demands we work within and rely on optimism for politics and corruption, speculation, content, the unending quest for more truth, more practice, and more politics, repetitive, biological, political, they cast blackness in the schema of utility, casting bodies outside of the law. This takes all the offense without any sufficient answer to the theory behind. Also, necropolitics turns all of their education arguments to their bathed in the slaughter, they're bathed in the name of those slaughtered, and name for the correction of Western perfection of the Western liberal trying to think native genocide to gain and land and lay the foundation for the law teaching. Also, in legal scholarship, church, we are trapped within status quo forms of violence. Also, their political any of the impact they get to education relies on a sovereign notion of utility where politics are only deemed useful insofar as they contribute to the smooth function of the law. We impact her and this is politics that can be seen from life. Only can say that the law can only sustain itself the original capacity of death, making a person insane the body deemed criminal, that makes them to make them more productive. Also, actually, the last piece of offense, the only impact in this space is with how we frame our political subjectivity. The only last debate of this topic, you valid ask the question: should teams are ready to talk last all the year? How can the baby leverage aside of radicality? Yeah, they this debate, the chimers will be, we all go home meeting questions. Debate is game only secondary to understanding as and training out because all of our models inside the creation of something going to confront the bonds of the heart of the debate community. You should understand the framework requires the creation of predictability and limited zones for us to remain comfortable in society constituent exclusion of certain bodies from the academy to preserve their law, preserve liberalism. Also, they say we're only from recognition that the F does the only form of sovereignty. Sovereignty can have independent our unique conjecture. We want to see debate. They have considered our talks, their research, and argument throughout the debate. We don't have to win that. We want to see the good idea. We only have to win that. Want to see the good idea. Such that simply ask jamming the research curriculum debate is good because they're open to space outside of the academy. Also, they haven't contested their sovereignty or solving the F. Also, the recognition is a prerequisite creative approaches to resolve the possibilities because we must know how they operate first. Also, they said only question debate is a model. They have produced a reason why our following debates range off with their forms of education only. Recent different results and get their offense. Also, go to the fairness debate. You can't go for fairness if you can see the framework, framework is not fair and you want you're describing even to the one you see because you don't want to talk about it means being asked them also negative just say we don't I feel like debating this wrong more negative flips are side by side arguments and dialogue equity arguments in the same model. A debate means for 0% of the debates also go there. True testing arguments, true testing the etymological true testing where this is subject to data set that can be a pretty measure of how something state realize itself in some words individuals are referred to status to hold them out to choose to their being go to the topical version of the app. They deceptive about the argument continue throughout the debate. They have continued replacing on some particular amounts of lines not neutral, but rather intricately applicable to not decipher the way the effective energy necessary for holistic rejection or revolution.
DJ, can we unplug whoever's laptop is so I can You can unplug mine, the stream's about to end. I actually moved the power strip closer unless